Sullivan, who also is going to preside while I run down to the floor and vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for holding this very important hearing. You know, the Arctic issues are something that, as the senator representing the only Arctic state in the country, I care deeply about, so appreciate the chairman focusing on this. You know, I want to first mention, I think the idea of the president looking to purchase Greenland has already been mentioned by a number of the panelists. Other presidents have thought about this. I think it's a wonderful idea if we can pull it off. Truman, Andrew Johnson, others did. But I also think it's important to remember, this is an op-ed I wrote in the Wall Street Journal a couple weeks ago, saying, hey, Greenland's nice, good to go if we can get it, but remember our Arctic state, Alaska, because everything that people talk about with regard to Greenland, we have in spades already in America. It's called Alaska. Arctic location, strategic and critical minerals, oil and gas, cornerstone of America's missile defense. It's all there. The problem is, as the panelists know, when Democrats get in power, Biden was the latest example, they want to turn Alaska into a national park, not recognizing our state for what it is, which is a strategic crown jewel for America. The father of the U.S. Air Force, General Billy Mitchell, in testimony before Congress in the mid-1930s, called Alaska the most strategic place on the planet. And it is. So that's what we're focused on. Don't forget Alaska. Fortunately, unlike President Biden, President Trump has already made it very clear that he's not going to forget Alaska. On day one, the president signed an executive order called Unleashing Alaska's Extraordinary Resource Potential. And I want to thank President Trump and his team for doing that. It goes into everything that this hearing has talked about. Strategic minerals, oil and gas, natural gas, getting the military involved. We just introduced my legislation called the Iron Dome Act, which is all about missile defense. Alaska is the cornerstone of our country's missile defense, and we can build that out even better. So appreciate what President Trump is already doing on Alaska. But it's not as if our adversaries don't recognize the strategic importance of Alaska or the Arctic. Next slide. This is what doesn't make a lot of news in the lower 48. In the last 3 years, we have had an enormous amount of Russian incursions into our airspace, America's airspace, Alaska's, AIDA's, naval incursions into our EEZ, and just in the past year, these are some depictions of this. This is another slide we have. This gives you all the Russian, Chinese joint strategic bomber incursions into our AIDAs, and very disturbingly, joint naval task force into our EEZ. So our adversaries clearly understand the Arctic. Can you put that other one slide up there? Just the one you had before, Scott. Yeah, perfect. So that's a wind-up to a question I want to ask the panelists. Mr. Gray, why don't we start with you? Given this, right, how important is America's Arctic? I've been talking to Secretary Hegseth, President, others, and Alaska, not just for missile defense, but to push back on what is clearly happening. We had a meeting on what we're going to be doing on the border. A lot of discussion with the President's team on the northern border. This is the northern border, and our adversaries are all over it. And in my view, what we need is a lot more infrastructure, a lot more military, a lot more missile defense, a lot more unleashing Alaska's critical minerals, oil and gas, and we couldn't have a better partner right now with President Trump In the contrast between him and President Biden, who wanted to make my state a national park, he issued 70 executive orders, 70, singularly focused on Alaska to shut us down. President Trump's wiped that out. But what's your sense on how we need to respond to this in America's Arctic, which is Alaska, and the potential that Greenland could add to this, because that's the other part of the Arctic, not the Alaska part of the Arctic?
Senator, it's incredibly important. I think we have to look at our hemisphere holistically, from the Aleutians to Greenland, from pole to pole, and have and President Trump began this process in his first term, this holistic Arctic strategy that I was pleased to be involved in. We have to, from a military standpoint, we've talked about icebreakers, but we have to—
By the way, just real quick on icebreakers. Russia has 54, some of which are nuclear, many of which are weaponized. We have 2, and 1 is broken. You think that's peace through strength when it comes to icebreakers? It isn't. Continue. Sorry to interrupt you.
It's obviously, the icebreakers are key, particularly when we think about what the adversaries are doing, nuclear-powered icebreakers, growing their fleet. When we think about the limited limited C-130 capacity that we have now for Arctic takeoff and landings, when we think about just the general attrition of Arctic warfighting capabilities since the end of the Cold War and the lack of investment in them, I know DoD will likely have its own Arctic strategy. We have to have Arctic warfighting capacity and deterrence as a much higher level priority. And I think your chart and what your state's dealing with is a perfect example of why.
Great. I'm going to turn to Senator Schmidt here. I know cares about these issues as well, and then I'll have some follow-up questions if there are no other senators coming back. So, Senator Schmidt.
Thank you, Senator.